Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of AA Entertainment. Today I will be listing 10 lost films that I really want to see. At number 10, The Monster of Frankenstein. Directed by Eugenio Testa, very little is known about the silent Italian adaptation of the classic Gothic Mary Shelley novel, except for the fact that it is lost. It was one of 3 adaptations of the classic horror tale at the time, including Life Without Soul, another lost horror film, and the now surviving Frankenstein, produced by Thomas Edison and directed by J. Dawley in 1910. Perhaps the biggest reason for the film's disappearance is the fact that it was considered so incredibly graphic and disturbing that it was heavily censored, causing it to be cut down to a 39-minute runtime. At number 9, the alternate ending to Freaks. Freaks is a classic and well-known horror film that has gained a bit of a following in recent years. I remember watching it for the first time when I was 9, and boy oh boy did it leave me speechless, not to mention the nightmarish ending, which leads us to our next entry. Spoiler alert, Todd Browning's macabre magnum opus ends when the sideshow freaks, the lovable and sympathetic anti-heroes of the picture, get their revenge on the money-hungry Cleopatra and brutish Hercules who have abused the innocent performers throughout the picture. It happens on a dark and stormy night. The carriage crashes, a brutal fight ensues, a fire starts, and the freaks chase Hercules and Cleopatra into the creepy woods. While the fate of Hercules is left ambiguous, we come to learn that the once dazzling Cleopatra was so severely mutilated, leaving her with only one eye, her vocal cords torn to shreds, and the body of a duck. But what about the original ending? Supposedly, in Todd Browning's original ending, we would have come to learn that the once masculine Hercules was castrated and left singing soprano. Also, we would have seen Cleopatra, as she was being chased in the woods, get crushed by a tree, trapped, allowing the freaks to gang up on her, ready to transform her into a human duck. This alternate ending traumatized audiences so much that it caused the lady to have a miscarriage, supposedly. At number 8, Go and Get It. Released in July of 1920, Go and Get It was a silent comedy horror. The film centers around a female reporter for a newspaper company she inherited from her recently deceased father. When it comes to light that a third party is trying to sabotage the company, she gets herself a new position under a false name, which then leads to her investigating a string of gruesome murders with the help of a fellow reporter named Kirk. This is where the film takes a sharp turn as the two discover that one of the victims is that of a scientist whose latest experiment involves transplanting the brain of a deranged serial killer into the body of a gorilla, who then murdered the scientist, escaped from the lab, and went on a brutal and bloody killing spree. I really shouldn't have to explain why I, or anybody for that matter, would want to watch this movie. A gorilla with the brain of a deranged serial killer? Come on, that's one hell of a pitch. Plus, looking back at all of the B horror movies I watched growing up from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I have a soft spot for horror films with people in ape costumes. Also, I'd like to mention that the actor who played the ape also played an ape man in the 1925 film adaptation of The Lost World, which, if you haven't seen it already, please do so right now. At number 7, The Gruyere Ghost Mystery. Written and directed by John Cosgrove, this 1921 Australian haunted house story is actually rooted in real-life occurrences. In April of 1921, the Bowen family reported being visited by ghosts who would knock on doors, bang on walls, and would throw rocks at their house. Police and volunteer investigators guarded the house, including a close friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Despite the daughter Minnie Bowen confessing to being the culprit behind these occurrences, passing it as a practical joke, the mystery, 100 years later, still remains unsolved. A huge reason why I would love to see this lost silent horror gem. Having seen Picnic at Hanging Rock and Wake in Fright, Australia is a great location for all that is spooky. At number 6, The Terror. Based on a play by Edgar Wallace, The Terror was not only the first sound film for Warner Brothers, but was also the first ever slasher film. Take that, Psycho and Peeping Tom. When a group of strangers, including a spiritualist, a detective, and 2 men who recently escaped from prison seeking revenge, take shelter at an old abandoned English manor. They all suspect it is haunted. However, strange noises and unexplainable organ music is the least of their worries when bodies start piling up in more and more grotesque and bloody fashion. I'm a simple man. I love scary haunted house movies, Combine something like The Cat and the Canary with a grisly serial killer, and I'm game. At number 5, The Four Devils. Directed by F.W. Murnau and produced by Fox, The Four Devils tells the story of 4 sibling orphans who are adopted by a clown and are trained as high-wire acrobats for a traveling circus. Much like The Greatest Show on Earth, this film presents a melodramatic behind-the-scenes look at circus life. Not only does the premise and the fact that it was directed by F.W. Murnau pique my interest, but having seen a 40-minute rough construction of the film using still existing segments of the screenplay and storyboard, Four Devils could have definitely been Murnau's magnum opus, not counting Nosferatu, of course. At number 4, The Head of Janus. Another lost film directed by the well-renowned F.W. Murnau, 1920's The Head of Janus is Murnau's take on the classic horror novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Although, at least in my opinion, Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel always seemed dry, numerous film adaptations were always spot on, not to mention John Barrymore's spine-tingling and nightmare-inducing portrayal of the nefarious Mr. Hyde. So looking back at an already frightening character portrayed by the cabinet of Dr. Caligari's Conrad Veidt, who also gave me nightmares for a lifetime, in a film directed by Nosferatu's F.W. Murnau, it's easy to imagine just how balls-to-the-wall terrifying the Head of Janus's Mr. Hyde would be. I should also mention this would have been the legendary Bela Lugosi's feature film debut. At number 3, another deleted scene from The Most Dangerous Game. Based on the equally acclaimed story by Richard Connell, The Most Dangerous Game is a shockingly morbid pre-code horror film starring Fay Wray and Robert Armstrong, who would star in King Kong 1 year later. After a ship sinks and all but one of the crew members either drown or are devoured by sharks, the sole survivor seeks shelter at a mysterious mansion in the middle of a secluded island. The eccentric invalid passes his time by hunting, but when slaughtering and butchering animals don't seem to bring him as much joy as it used to, he decides to go for the most dangerous game, that being men. So right off the bat, a film about hunting and butchering human beings wasn't shocking enough for audiences back in 1932. The original cut of 78 minutes, which was previewed to audiences in 32, contained some content which pushed the envelope just a bit much. In the film, our 2 lead protagonists discover their host's morbid trophy room where he keeps the remains of his victims. But in the original cut, we were treated to more heads in jars, the emaciated carcass of a sailor impaled by an arrow, and another stuffed full-body carcass being ravaged by dogs. At number 2, A Blind Bargain. Based on the novel The Octave of Claudius by Barry Payne, A Blind Bargain stars none other than the man of 1,000 faces, Lon Chaney Sr., in a dual role. One, a sinister mad doctor who performs abhorrent medical experiments on living humans, and the other being one of his unfortunate victims turned slave, a half-ape, half-human. The story is actually pretty tragic. A man who hasn't a penny to his name turns to a life of crime, stealing so he can help pay for his dying mother's medical experiments. One night, after attempting to rob the mad scientist played by Lon Chaney, he offers the poor man to cure his mother's illness and an additional sum of money, as long as he agrees to be the specimen for the evil doctor's next sinister experiment. He is given 8 days to enjoy the rest of his life as a normal human being before the procedure starts. I am a massive Lon Chaney fan, and by looking at my views, so are a lot of you. It's also worth mentioning that it was this very image I spotted in a book on horror films at a young age that sparked my interest in lost cinema. At number 1, Draculas Death. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the holy grail of lost cinema. Draculas Death predates Nosferatu by 1 year, having been released in 1921 and produced in Hungary. Although Murnau changed the names and kept the story, Draculas Death has very little to do with the Bram Stoker novel, aside from the title character. As a matter of fact, the synopsis has a bit of a Phantom of the Opera vibe going on. After a woman goes to an insane asylum, she is deeply disturbed by one of the inmates who claims to be the blood-sucking vampire. After meeting him, she is haunted by ghoulish and vivid hallucinations and nightmares. But as the film progresses, her visions become more and more real, as she is sought after by the supposed real-life Dracula. Just by looking at these stills and going by the plot, I would sell my soul just to see this film. Not to mention silent horror films set in insane asylums, such as Karate Ipeji, or A Page of Madness, and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, are straight-up nightmare fuel.